My husband's ex told him I cheated with my stepbrother, claiming our baby isn't his. We eventually divorce. Years later he returns and wants the baby, but he never expects the bad news. My husband's ex convinced him that I was pregnant with my stepbrother's child, which led him to demand either a divorce or an abortion. Now, 10 years later, he wants to see his child. The truth is, much worse. His ex completely manipulated him into believing I had cheated on him. Not only that, she convinced him that the person I supposedly cheated with was my own stepbrother, and that I was pregnant as a result. I would never be unfaithful to him, let alone with my stepbrother, but he didn't believe me. So I left him. And now he suddenly wants to see the child. For clarity, I'll use fake names. I'm 35. Grant, 38, is my current husband. Sebastian is my stepbrother. Ezra is my ex-husband. Cassie in her 30s is Ezra's ex-girlfriend from before we met. I'll try to keep this as clear as possible, but this is a mix of seeking advice, managing anxiety, and venting anger that I don't want to take out on anyone else. Even if you're just here to read, that's fine. I hope I can do justice to summarizing one of the worst periods of my life. Before I get too sidetracked with background details, here's the current situation. I recently found out that my ex-husband has been asking about me after nearly a decade of silence, because he wants to see me and my child. It might not sound like much in one sentence, but as you read on, you'll understand why this has caused such an emotional upheaval. When I was 24, my best friend and I moved across the country to a new city and state to start our adult lives. 6 months later, she was offered her dream job back in our hometown. I encouraged her to take it, of course, but that left me alone in a new place. 2 weeks after she left, I met Ezra. I was lonely, stressed from my new job, and without friends. He had just broken up with his high school girlfriend. All of that came together to create a very intense relationship. Within a few weeks, he was practically living in my apartment, and I was convinced he was the love of my life. He was in his final semester of college after switching majors several times, and was planning to start working at his father's engineering company, about half an hour outside the city. I started to imagine a future there. Looking back now, the warning signs were obvious, but hindsight is always clearer than foresight. At his graduation, his ex-girlfriend showed up with his mother. I smiled, introduced myself, and tried to make a good impression. Cassie was basically a family friend, which made sense given how long they had been together. She was the classic girl-next-door type. Their mothers were best friends, and they had grown up together. I was told that the day they started dating had been the happiest day of Ezra's mother's life. I was young, naive, and in love, so I tolerated it. I sat next to her, and did everything I could to get along with his mother. She never fully accepted me, but I kept trying. From that moment on, Cassie was a constant presence in my life. Ezra said it was difficult to cut contact with her because of their families, so I tried to understand. It didn't matter that she clung to his arm at every event, or called him by affectionate nicknames. We would go home to our apartment, soon our shared home, and he would tell me he loved me. And I believed him. He said he didn't want to hurt his family by cutting Cassie out. I couldn't argue with that. I loved my own family deeply and would do anything for them, so I understood his desire to protect his mother's feelings. 8 months into our relationship, he proposed. I now know he did it the same day he learned that Cassie had a new boyfriend. At the time, I was blinded by love, and happily accepted, even though there was no ring. I thought he simply couldn't wait. A year later, I walked down the aisle, believing it would be the best day of my life. I hadn't seen my family in months, and suddenly they were all there, celebrating with us. I was excited to reconnect with them and introduce them properly. Up to that point, the only member of my family Ezra had met was my stepbrother, who had visited me a few months earlier. I didn't even care that Cassie showed up in a white dress, or that she danced with him almost as much as I did. I excused it, telling myself that Ezra was just celebrating this special day with his lifelong friend. After all, I had danced with my best friend. And my stepbrother, the two people closest to me besides Ezra. That's what I did throughout my entire marriage. I ignored the warning signs and justified his behavior, especially when it came to Cassie, but that should have been a massive red flag. For 2 years, I made excuses every time Ezra prioritized his ex-girlfriend, the same woman he privately called obsessive and crazy when no one else could hear. I ignored every comparison his mother made between me and Cassie. I turned the other cheek whenever Cassie made snide remarks disguised as jokes or helpful advice. At the end of the day, Ezra was all I had, or so I believed. Every friendship I built in that city was connected to him or to us, as a couple. Every family connection I had there came through him. My own family lived hours away in another state, and Ezra was never willing to make that trip. He was my entire world. Then I got pregnant. To be clear, There was no abuse or anything like that. In a way, that might have been easier to explain to my family and friends. What finally forced me to open my eyes to how much Cassie influenced his life was the fact that he genuinely believed I was pregnant with my stepbrother's child. Take a moment to process how absurd that is. Ezra truly believed that the baby I was carrying wasn't his, that I had cheated on him with Sebastian, my stepbrother, because I lived far from home, and our relationship before marriage hadn't been very long. Sebastian and Ezra had only met once before the wedding. When Sebastian visited me early in our relationship, the second time they met was at our wedding. About a year and a half into our marriage, I flew back to my hometown to celebrate my mother's 60th birthday. Ezra didn't want to come. A month later, I found out I was pregnant. I thought he would be happy. He had always talked about wanting a big family, and we had friends and relatives ready to support us. But instead of joy, the first thing he said was, "She said this would happen." It's been almost 10 years, and I still remember those words with complete clarity. I was completely confused. The only explanation he gave was, "She warned me and I should have believed her." That same night, instead of celebrating, he left the apartment and ignored all my calls and messages. When he came back the next morning, he gave me two options: abortion or divorce. To spare the drawn-out details, when I finally got him to explain, I learned that Cassie had been filling his head with lies. According to her, during our wedding, Sebastian and I had behaved inappropriately for step-siblings, that we were too close, too affectionate. She claimed the way we hugged, posed for photos, and spent time together at the reception was too intimate, almost romantic. She even suggested that I had moved to that city because I was heartbroken after Sebastian got a girlfriend. After the wedding, Cassie spent months feeding Ezra these lies. All she had were small glimpses of my relationship with Sebastian from social media, since he lived in another state. But that didn't stop her. Then, when I traveled alone to see my family and came back pregnant, that was all she needed to convince Ezra I had cheated. Of course, I denied everything. None of the accusations Ezra believed were true. Sebastian was like a twin brother to me. The idea was not only ridiculous, it was deeply offensive. But Ezra didn't care. He didn't care when I offered to take a paternity test. He didn't care when I showed him medical reports proving I was already pregnant before I traveled. He didn't even care when I broke down in front of him, begging him to come to his senses. It was devastating, but I couldn't ignore it. I packed my things, requested a transfer at work, and returned home to my real family. All things considered, the divorce was relatively simple. Ezra's mother had insisted on a prenuptial agreement, and since we had no shared assets, the process moved quickly. Ezra also refused any paternity test and signed a document relinquishing all rights to our unborn child. I hadn't heard from him since, until now. And now I've learned that he's looking for me and our son. My concerns are these. My current husband, Grant, knows very little about Ezra, or how my previous marriage ended. He knows I was married before, and that it didn't end well. Nothing more. It feels like only a matter of time before Ezra finds a way to contact me. What am I supposed to do when that happens? Maybe it's not as bad as I'm imagining, and if that's the case, feel free to say so, but I can feel myself starting to panic. This is a chapter of my life. I thought this chapter of my life was completely closed, and I don't want to reopen it. Update 1. With the intention of not attracting more attention than I already have, I'll try to be even more vague about the details of this situation and the people involved. Maybe calling him a stalker is an exaggeration based on what has happened so far, which admittedly hasn't been much. 2 days after an old friend warned me that my ex-husband was trying to contact me, I started receiving follow requests on all my social media accounts. He hasn't sent any messages yet since I haven't accepted the requests, but I don't think it will be long before they start. He's even been viewing my LinkedIn profile, which I can see, because the platform shows who visits your page. It's obvious that he deliberately searched for me. I gathered the courage to talk to my husband Grant about everything I mentioned in my previous post. I told him the full story, my relationship with Ezra, Cassie, everything I went through with him and his family, and finally his reaction to my pregnancy. Fortunately, the man I'm married to now is 1,000 times better than my ex. He was understanding and supportive as I recounted this never-ending story. When I finished, he was more focused on comforting me than on the fact that I had never told him any of this before. Of course, right at that moment the follow requests increased. We discussed what to do and decided to block all his accounts on every platform where he found me, which turned out to be nearly all of them. He had been searching through every corner of my online presence. Thankfully, all my accounts are private. I thought blocking him would give me some peace of mind, but then the messages started. He created fake accounts to send me private messages on almost every platform. In them he said he had made a mistake and wanted to see me and meet his son. The wording varied, but the message was always the same. He wasn't going to stop contacting me until I allowed him to see his child. He insisted that the child deserved to know his real father and claimed that having a biological father was better than having a stepfather. He said I couldn't understand because, according to him, I had always believed relationships with in-laws were the same as blood relationships. The more I ignored him, the longer his messages became. He kept insisting that he had the right to see his son. He even said he would continue creating new accounts, and that I wouldn't be able to block him forever. I have no doubt that he will keep trying to contact me. I just hope that longer messages are the only way this situation escalates. Grant has reassured me that we are completely safe, and that Ezra won't do anything truly dangerous. But I have a bad feeling about all of this. Update 2. He showed up at my mom's house. My ex-husband, the man I hadn't seen in nearly 10 years, appeared at my mother's door because I wasn't responding to his messages. I visit my mom every Saturday without fail, unless something important comes up, and I always bring my son with me. But this time, he had stayed over at a friend's house on Friday night, so I went alone that morning. I didn't notice the car parked across the street or the man sitting inside it. At least not until I pulled into the driveway and got out. That's when he stepped out of his car and started walking toward me. Naturally, I was shocked and scared when I saw a man approaching me. But when I recognized him, the fear didn't go away. He was standing outside my mother's house, a place he had never visited during our marriage, a place he had never cared to go. His response when I confronted him was simple. What was I doing there? Just like in his messages, he said he wanted to see his son. He had tracked me across the country, apparently finding my address through shipping records when I moved. All because he wanted to see the child he once believed wasn't his Ed. I don't know if I was being stupid or brave, but in that moment the fear disappeared and was replaced by anger. I didn't care that he had found my mother's address. I didn't care that we were standing in the middle of a neighborhood known for nosy neighbors. I didn't care that I was alone with him for the first time since our marriage ended. I yelled at him, unleashing everything I had been holding inside, throwing every single thing he had done during our relationship back at him. His only defense was that Cassie had manipulated him. He said he had been hurt and vulnerable, and had trusted his lifelong friend. Apparently this all began when Cassie nearly got married a few months ago, and finally admitted that she had been lying all along. The moment Ezra realized I had actually been pregnant with his child, he started searching for me. None of our mutual friends gave him my number, so he turned to finding me online. And when I blocked him everywhere, he resorted to tracking me down in person. He said he was desperate to see his child. But I had devastating news for him. He didn't have a child. The stress from his accusations, the divorce and moving across the country all piled up, and just a few months after we separated, I lost the baby. The child he had given up on never came to be. Ezra doesn't have a child. My son, Spencer, is Grant's, my stepson, whom I adopted as my own. He has the same red hair as me and a personality just as strong. Because Ezra was right about one thing. To me, relationships with in-laws are just as valuable as blood relations. I have a child, but Ezra does not. By that point, I had been yelling loudly and for so long that my mother and stepfather came outside, along with several curious neighbors. I don't know if it was the presence of an audience or the shock, but when my stepfather told Ezra it would be best for him to leave, he did so without arguing. Maybe I should have told him all of this from the beginning instead of blocking him and ignoring his messages. But how could I have known he would show up here? I just hope that now that he knows the truth, he will return to his life far away from me and my family. Update 3. Logically, I should have realized it wouldn't be that easy to get rid of Ezra. Not after he followed me across the country, desperate to see a child who doesn't exist. To be honest, when I called him a stalker in my earlier updates, part of me was joking, trying to cope with his sudden reappearance in my life. Yes, he had followed my activity on every social media account I had. But there's a big difference between being a passive observer and becoming an active stalker. Apparently, Ezra was more than willing to cross that line. I don't know why I thought he would believe me when I told him Spencer wasn't his son. To be clear, he isn't. Spencer doesn't even have a biological connection to me. Beyond my marriage to his father, and my adoption of him, we don't share blood. The fact that we both have red hair was something Grant and I called destiny when I decided to adopt Spencer as my own. But expecting Ezra to believe me, when the very reason for our divorce was that he refused to believe me, was foolish. Honestly, I don't know what I expected from him. Maybe I thought he would simply accept what I told him and disappear forever. That I would never have to see him again. After that day at my mother's house, I started noticing his car everywhere. The first time, I thought it was parked near my street, but only briefly, so I assumed I was being paranoid. The second time, I mentioned it to Grant. From then on, we both became more vigilant. Sure enough, his car kept appearing. Every time we spotted it, he would speed off before we could do anything. After 2 weeks of this, we went to the police. We had taken photos of his car in different places, mostly near my house and my mother's. I thought they would take seriously the fact that we were being watched and followed by my ex-husband, who believed my child was his. They didn't. Although what we presented seemed suspicious, the police told us they couldn't arrest someone simply for being nearby. We had no proof he intended to harm us, and he hadn't done anything directly against us. So we were on our own. Update 4. I'm happy to say that my ex-husband will no longer be a problem for me or my family. After doing everything we could to convince the police to take preventive action without success, we finally managed to gather the evidence needed for him to be arrested. As I mentioned before, Ezra had been lingering around Spencer's school. The conclusion was obvious. He intended to take the child he believed was his, no matter what I wanted. Of course, neither Grant nor I were going to let that happen. Fortunately, our neighbor, who is a teacher at Spencer's school, shared our concern. Thanks to her, we were able to stay one step ahead. We knew that eventually Ezra would try something. We just had to wait. In the meantime, we informed the school staff about everything that was happening. We made it clear that Spencer was not to leave the school with anyone except our neighbor Grant or me. A few days later, it happened. In the middle of the day, Ezra walked into the school office and said he was there to pick up Spencer on my behalf, because there had been an emergency involving his grandmother. He even mentioned my mother's name, likely thinking it would make his story more convincing. When the staff told him they needed to call me before releasing Spencer, he insisted that I was busy with the emergency and couldn't be disturbed. When he couldn't persuade them, he pretended he would call me himself, and left the building with that excuse. Of course he never called. Instead, he sat in his car outside the school, waiting. However, the school contacted me immediately to inform me of everything, just as we had planned. They also recorded the entire interaction on video. At the end of the school day, they released the students. As usual, the students were released, but they kept Spencer in his classroom with my neighbor. That's when the police, with the video in hand, arrived to arrest Ezra while he was sitting in his car. Inside the car, the police found 2 plane tickets to his home state, along with high-powered sedatives. They believe his plan was to use that medication on Spencer to take him away. Ezra was arrested and will remain in custody until his trial, where he will face charges of conspiracy to commit kidnapping, endangering a minor, and any other charges that may be added. Finally, our nightmare is over. Update 5. It's been months since my last update. Ezra is in prison. I won't go into detail about all the exact charges, because I don't want anyone to discover his real name and track me through this, but I can say he will be in prison for several years. Although I would prefer he stayed there forever, the charges include the ones I mentioned before, along with a few additional ones. Somehow, he managed to avoid certain charges, which makes no sense to me, but as long as he's behind bars, I don't care. He tried to justify the sedatives by saying they were his, which was true since he had a prescription. He had been taking them after learning the truth. Still, the plane tickets and the overall plan were disturbing enough that it's likely he intended to use them. In addition to that, we now have restraining orders against him for Grant, Spencer, and me. He will never be able to approach Spencer's school without being arrested. During the trial, an official paternity test was conducted, proving once and for all that Spencer is Grant's son. My medical records were also presented with my consent, confirming that I had a miscarriage a few months after separating from Ezra all those years ago. Ezra did all of this only to end up in prison for absolutely nothing. And the cherry on top, Cassie. She showed up at the trial and caused a huge scene, pretending to be devastated that Ezra was going to prison. Shortly after her husband publicly left her. Apparently she had been constantly posting on social media in support of him. In her last post, her husband commented that she was free to go support Ezra in prison since she refused to stop talking about him. Friends from the city have told me that her divorce is already in progress. Of course, I'd blocked Cassie and all of Ezra's acquaintances on every platform I could think of. I've cut off any possibility of crossing paths with them again. Update 6. Cassie and Ezra were together, which many people suspected, and I won't deny that I did too. That's why she nearly ended up divorced. I don't know if their relationship began while Ezra and I were still married, before we got married, or after we separated, but what's clear is that she always wanted to be with him again. The good news for her is that now she can enjoy conjugal visits in prison and won't have to hide from her husband while continuing her relationship with Ezra. Obviously, it won't be as glamorous as meeting in a fancy hotel, but not everything in life is perfect. The funniest part is how I found out about all of this. Cassie emailed me. Yes, she had the audacity to send me a message full of insults and hurtful comments. As you can imagine, she basically tried to rub it in my face that she had won, because in the end, thanks to the lies she fed Ezra, she ended up with him. I was very tempted to respond and tell her she shouldn't feel proud, because all she got was a pathetic loser. But the truth is, I wanted to be the more mature person in this situation. That's a lie. I did respond to her, and after sending my message, I blocked her. I imagine she sent more emails filled with inappropriate comments, but fortunately, no one will ever read them. What a tragedy, right? Anyway, even though I could have taken the high road, I couldn't resist getting the last word. Sometimes, being a little immature is the best kind of therapy. Update 7. I just learned something that I'm sure will leave you speechless, and I couldn't wait to get home to write it here. Ezra has been beaten up in prison. Don't worry, for those of you who might feel sorry for that gentle soul, he's out of danger, but from what I've been told, inmates don't look kindly on men who try to kidnap children. So he received a special welcome to make it clear what they think of someone like him. No matter how much Ezra has tried to play the victim all this time, the rules inside prison are very different. There, his attempts at manipulation and his sense of superiority mean nothing. And it seems he has learned that the hard way.